He went through that surgery, which he never really recovered from, and then passed away in the fall. But this bears no resemblance to him. I'm sure you'll know that when you hear it. Because popularity was his middle name, its prod was pride, its price was pain. He never learned the word called no. They spoke of him as good old Joe. His life was one long laughing spell, and how he felt you couldn't tell. His favorite words were yes and sure. Yes, good old Joe was Simon Pure. So when he died, they wrote these lines and laid him down midst whispering pines. Here lies a man, his name was Joe, but what he stood for, we'll never know. Okay, we know that doesn't describe Joe, we know. What do you stand for? What do you stand for? You know, our lessons that we've had today, they're all kind of tough. Maybe it's one of those Sundays that it's the readings are just very, very challenging. Let me just go through them a little bit real quickly with you. I'm going to spend some time on this Old Testament passage because it kind of starts out like a love story. How many of us like love stories? Anybody, you know? A good number of hands. I would bet most of us do if you didn't raise your hand. As long as they're not real sappy, okay? I don't need a sappy love story, but yeah, I think that most of us do like love stories. This is the way this particular passage kind of starts out almost as a love story, but it changes pretty quickly. You know what he's dealing with here, Isaiah, and you may remember, again, Isaiah was living in the late 600s, latter half of the 600s and on into the 500s BC, and telling that, actually, no, I take that back, latter half of the 700s and on into the 600s BC, and addressing the people that were in Judah, the southern nation, and saying, don't go the way of the northern nation. Anyway, a lot of problems that he saw there. And he starts off this passage by saying, let me sing for my beloved, my love song concerning his vineyard. Kind of draws you in a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if he actually did sing it on more than one occasion somewhere. People listening say, oh, let's listen to this. Let's catch the drift. But really what he's getting ready to show is that what's happening in Judah and Israel as well is that people were calling darkness, evil, light. People were calling bad, good. And I submit to you that we're living in a culture very similar to that in many, many ways. And so what does he say? He began it as a song, but then he shows. Right there he says, this is what's happened. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. But built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it, and he looked for it to yield grapes. Stop right there. This is an analogy. Obviously, we read the rest of the passage. You know, he's drawn an analogy. He built this, found the best land he could, cleared it of all the stuff that would keep the grapes or the vines from producing grapefruit. He built a watchtower. You know, foxes, I understand, were an issue for them back there. If you go to the Song of Solomon and look into that, there's a reference also to foxes that get into the vineyard and steal and ruin the fruit and the vines. Now that analogy is a different one, but still that's some truth there. He built a hedge around it and stone. It was most likely a stone wall. He did everything, the owner did everything he could possibly do to make this one of the best vineyards that is. And then he looked for it to bear the fruit that it was supposed to bear. But he says, the very last line of verse 2, but it yielded wild grapes. Wild grapes. You know what wild grapes are? They're the stuff that if you were to eat one, you'd spit it out immediately. Incredibly bitter. The kind of stuff that just would rot your teeth. It's really not good for much of anything other than to be thrown out. And the owner is sitting there thinking, what happened? followed all the rules. I did everything that was right. Again, that list I just gave you, everything was good. So what happened to this fruit? It was supposed to be amongst the best of fruit, and it turned out to be bitter, turned out to be bad, turned out to be wild fruit. Well, we know history-wise, we know what happened to the nation of Judah. Remember your history. Came to 605 BC, and the first wave of exiles were carried off to Babylon. Came to 597 BC, the second wave of exiles were carried off to Babylon. And finally in 586 BC, the last wave and the great wave of exiles were carried off to Babylon. And the Babylonians came in and destroyed the temple, and everybody, they were in exile until, well, for 70 years, as the time goes from the first exile. In other words, they were thrown out. Just like the bad grapes, the wild grapes, God said, they're good for nothing. I'm throwing them out. This is what Isaiah is telling them they had a chance to avoid. He goes on from there. Verse 3, and now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah. You know what that tells us? He was addressing everybody, not just leadership in the nation, but he was addressing all of the people, all of the men and the women too. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem, but Jerusalem was the capital city, wasn't it? So in a sense, it was representative of the whole nation, not just the people, but all the leadership for sure, but the nation. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem, men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I looked for it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I'll tell you what I will do. I'll remove its hedge. It shall be devoured. I will break down its wall. It shall be trampled down. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed with, and briars and thorns shall grow up. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. In other words, this vineyard was worth nothing but, again, to be destroyed. It wasn't producing the fruit that the owner established it for. And then comes the zinger. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel and the men of Judah. The people. The people. What did he establish it for? What was the good fruit that he was looking for? He said, the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. And he looked for justice, but behold what? Remember the word that was there? Bloodshed. He looked for justice, but he got bloodshed. He looked for righteousness, but behold, an outcry. In other words, those who were being treated with no righteousness, that should have been given righteousness in the justice system and things like that, were not given any. And, well, as the book of Genesis says, the blood of Abel cried out to God. And they were crying out to God in this time. Justice, bloodshed, righteousness, an outcry. You know, we talked about integrity last week. Now we talk about, well, perseverance, commitment. What is it? When we come up against something that we would just as soon avoid, what do? What do we do? That's why I asked, what do you stand for? What do we stand for? What should the church stand for? And how do we go about knowing what that is? I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, anybody ever hear the name of Jeffrey Epstein? Anybody here not hear the name of Jeffrey Epstein? In the news a lot. Committed suicide a week ago yesterday while he was in the jail. But there are a lot of people who are saying, don't know how that could have happened. Don't know what happened. I know the official report came out, was it yesterday or Friday, whenever it was, saying it was officially, yeah, it's suicide, but was it? Maybe someday we'll find out that's exactly what happened, and maybe someday we'll find out that's not so much what happened. But go to other areas of life. Bloodshed. bloodshed. I don't know what comes in your mind when you hear bloodshed. I know what comes in my mind. That is abortion. You realize the number is up to over 60 million? Let that number try to sink in a little bit. 60 million, that according to the scriptures, these are people that are being murdered every day right here in this country. And there's really no other way to look at it, especially given the science that has come along since 1973. The blood cries out from the ground. The blood cries out from the ground. You know who Noah Webster was? Noah Webster was one of the individuals that helped, I don't know whether he was right there in the 70s and how active he was, but one of those that are attributed with great influence in the early development of this country. Wrote the first dictionary. This is what he said. He's been called the father of American scholarship and education, Noah Webster. He says, if the citizens neglect their duty and place unprincipled men in office, the government will soon be corrupted. Soon. He says, and before I go on, you know that we do not live in a democracy. Do you know that? We live in a republic. We live in a constitutional republic. And so democracy, let's see, how was it explained to me once? In a democracy, if you own something, you own a bicycle, and the majority of people want to take that bicycle from you, they can do it. And it's legal. That's democracy. But in a republic, no, you're protected by laws. And in a constitutional republic, you're protected by the Constitution. But he goes on. He goes on from there. If a Republican government fails to secure public prosperity and happiness, it must be because the citizens neglect the divine commands and elect bad men to make and administer the laws. Are we living in a time, and I know right now I'm addressing just basically us that live here in America at this section, but what about other ways of administering laws or how we can help one another? The gospel passage today talks about reading the times. He says, you know, it's amazing. It just amazes me. He says, I can't believe you guys. He says, you know how to look at the nature, you can tell what's going to happen with respect to the weather, but you can't discern the times now. You can't see what's going on. You know what Jesus was saying to them? He says, number one, it's not that hard to figure it out, but you haven't paid any attention. You haven't spent some time trying to figure it out. And you're dealing with temporal things when you should be dealing at least as much, if not more, with eternal things. This is not rocket science, he says. In a sense. May we have eyes that see and ears that hear. You know what he said? He said, I didn't come to bring peace. I came to bring fire. I came to bring division. Well, how do you get from that to the gentle Jesus, meek and mild? All I have to do is say a prayer and you know, I'm saved. And that's it. There's no discipleship. There's no discipline. There's nothing. He says, you've educated yourself about natural things. Why not eternal things? I went to a priest friend's retirement party a number of weeks ago. Many of you know, maybe some of you know Woody Vollen, Anglican priest up in Eustis. He's younger than me, and he's retired. What's that tell you? Oh boy. Anyway, one of the stories that was shared at that retirement party is when he called an individual in his church and had a conversation with him. And I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but the zinger was when Woody said to this man, I just wish you loved Jesus as much as you love football. And he said, and the fellow that was said to was there at that party and gave testimony to how that really got down into the depths of his soul. do I love Jesus as much as I love, well, fill in the blank? That's what Jesus is saying. That's what Isaiah is saying. Do you love God? What do you stand for? What do we stand for? Do we love Him that much? Or do we love other things more? You know, look at that list in the epistle, that reading from Hebrews. A lot of those guys, people got great blessings. And others sought the blessings, but they just got more stress. Some were sawn in two. Did you catch that? Some were sawn in two. All of them, regardless of whether they got the blessing or they got the stress, they were all looking for something more. They were looking for a better city, is the way it's described in the chapter. A better city. And he says if they'd wanted a city that was here, they could have gone back to where they were. But no, he says looking for a better city, an eternal city. Kind of like, reminds me of a fella in Pilgrim's Progress, searching for celestial city. I think that's the way it is. If you haven't read that book, Pilgrim's Progress, I encourage you to do that. Well, this is kind of what God was looking for when He planted this vineyard, when He put the nation of Israel. I want justice. And yet what I'm getting is bloodshed. I want righteousness. What I'm getting is an outcry from so many people. In other words, Judah had an outward appearance of being godly because they were, the vineyard was grapes. But God was saying, no, they were wild grapes. How many of you know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer is? I see a good number of hands. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran pastor back during World War II. And he was speaking out against the war machine of Germany. And people encouraged him, man, you're in danger, you better get out of here. And he did. He fled to America, went to New York, was there for a while, but then he was convicted. He said, my words, I would put it in his mouth. He realized, what am I standing for by fleeing my country, fleeing that, and coming over here? I'm not standing for what I need to stand for. And so he went back to Germany. Ultimately, he was imprisoned, and he died in prison like just, a few weeks before the Allied forces came in and liberated that camp. But he was asked once, he was asked, what is it that allowed the church of his day to sit by and let the things happen that happened over there? How is it possible? It was in 1943, the church to sit back and let Hitler seize absolute power. This was his firm answer. This is a quote. It was the teaching of cheap grace. Cheap grace is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance, baptism without church discipline, communion without confession, absolution without personal confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ. That's what Isaiah was seeing. That's what Jesus was saying. I didn't come to bring peace. I came to bring division. Because Jesus said, I am the truth. He said that to Pilate. I was born to bear witness to truth. And when we accept truth, we got to anticipate that we're going to run into problems with people, because that truth will be a dividing line between people who want what they want versus people who want what God wants. So where are we? Are we consider ourselves in a place where maybe we're more like the vineyard that Isaiah describes? Are we part of the wild grapes, or are we part of the grapes that Jesus or that God wanted planted? We need to always speak the truth in love. Let me close with this last little illustration. I won't read the whole quote, but yesterday's John Stott Daily Thought, I make reference to him every once in a while. put his quotes up on Facebook. Yesterday's quote was pretty instructive. And he talked about how are we supposed to relate to people. And he said, there's two ways. And all this is kind of unpacked from the passage in Colossians. We just went through Colossians a little bit. He said the first way is as we encounter an individual, we encounter that individual the same way, we should encounter them the same way Jesus would encounter them. In other words, we are Jesus. We are called to be Jesus to them. Whether that's somebody who loves Jesus or somebody who hates Jesus, it doesn't make any difference. We are called to treat them the way Jesus would treat them. Then he says we do just the opposite as well. We treat them as if they were Jesus. What if we understood that person? Irrespective of the way they're treating us. If we could understand, but this is, I'm going to treat you because I see Jesus in you. Whether we do literally see him in their words or their actions or not. Maybe we see the exact opposite of Jesus. Maybe we see the fullness of the devil in them, but I'm going to treat you as if you're Jesus. So we treat them as if we are Jesus. How would Jesus treat them? But as if they were Jesus. And that's love. That's kind of what you did. A little bit. You saw Jesus out there in the rain, and you went to help him. And you were Jesus to that man, you and the others. That probably happens numerous times during the week. We may not realize it. That's bearing righteousness. That's bearing the justice. We may need to bring out the justice. God is a God of love, but he's also a God of justice. And so when people do bad things, do they need to have justice administered to them? Maybe. They need to be loved, but maybe they need justice as well. And maybe you're the means of that justice. Not to hurt them, but to maybe speak the words of truth to them that brings them to a level of repentance. He looked for justice, but behold bloodshed. For righteousness, but behold an outcry. So let me ask you again, what do you stand for? What does your life stand for? What should it stand for? Father God, as we go forth from this place, we thank you for the gift of salvation that you have bestowed on us. But so empower us, bend our wills to your own, that we live a life that brings glory, honor, and praise to you, Jesus. And if that brings division in a family or division with friends that we have had for many, many years because of their rejection, not our rejection, hopefully, but their rejection of your truth, well, may we speak the truth in love. May we administer justice rightly. May we elect people, especially as we're well into, again, seems like we never get out of the campaigning season. May we elect people that love you, Jesus, that love you, Lord God, that are filled by your Spirit, that are given wisdom that comes from you, can tell the difference between doing this or doing that, and which one promotes justice and righteousness. May we be good stewards of all that you have given us, everything. May you be glorified. May your church be built up, strengthened to carry out the ministry that you've called us to here and all across the globe. For it's for your glory and in your name, Jesus, that we